technology push and proximity factors explain different levels of oil dependence across EU countries. So, the recent energy crisis triggered by the war in Ukraine has made it bluntly clear that the European Union is still heavily dependent on fossil fuels to satisfy their energy needs. On the one hand, to guarantee energy security, energy supply should be available uninterruptedly and at affordable prices to foster economic progress and alleviate poverty. On the other hand, climate mitigation policies require changes in consumption patterns of energy sources, especially replacing fossil fuel energy sources with renewable alternatives. To date, oil is still the main energy source within the national energy mix of most European Union countries. The main problems that EU countries are currently facing are related to the technological, infrastructural, institutional, and behavioral lock-ins that characterize their energy systems and which substantially increase the costs associated with transitioning the capital stock, which is currently designed for a fossil fuel-oriented economy, and which leads these countries on a path dependence. However, despite the fact that most European countries share a large part of environmental and energy policies, however, the energy transition speed and the oil dependency level are quite variable within the European Union. So with this paper, we want to understand what are the main drivers of such heterogeneity in the levels of oil dependence among EU countries by focusing specifically on three sets of factors: technology push, demand pull, and proximity factors. So in particular, we want to answer three main research questions. First, we want to understand what is the role of trade network relations and technology push and demand pull policy instruments in fostering or mitigating oil dependence. Second, we investigate whether demand pull and technology push are effective policy instruments to cut off the main sources of oil dependence. And finally, we ask whether the success of innovation in climate change mitigation technologies in reducing effectively oil dependence through a mitigation of technological lock-ins may depend on whether a country has a comparative advantage or a disadvantage in exporting those same technologies. So, from a methodological perspective, we first make use of complex network theory to represent the international crude oil trade network, in which countries are the nodes and trade flows of oil between them are the corresponding links. Then we use this framework in a proper econometric setting to evaluate the specific effect of each key factor on oil dependence. So as for the measures of network centralities, we focus on three main centrality measures, which are the weighted integrity centrality, the eigenvector centrality, and the Erfindel-Hirschman concentration index. So our dependent variable is the weighted integrity centrality, which measures the numbers of incoming flows of crude oil weighted for the monetary value. So countries that display a high weighted integrity centrality can be considered as market hubs because they import oil from a large amount from a large number of countries. It is also an established measure of dependence within the economic literature and depending on which trade flows you are considering. So as we can see from these two core diagrams, we can observe here that almost all of the European Union countries import oil from the non-European market. as we indicate with W, which stands for the rest of the world. Also, we can notice that 5 countries emerged as the main importers of oil from the rest of the world, which are the Netherlands, Italy, France, Spain, and Germany. And considering variation over the period from 1999 to 2019, we can observe a growth in Dutch imports from the rest of the world and a contraction in French and German imports. Among key cover rates, we then employ 2 other measures of network centralities. The first is the eigenvector centrality that evaluates the importance of a node based on the importance of the nodes to which a country is connected. So we interpret this measure, we proxy it for the existence of privileged commercial relationships of EU countries with key oil exporting countries. And finally, we allow for accounting for the diversification of oil imports through the Herfindahl-Hirschman index. Therefore, countries that have a high Herfindahl-Hirschman index import oil from a limited number of countries, and so they are especially vulnerable to shocks occurring in exporting countries. As we can see here, in line with the graph for the weighted in degree centrality, even in this case, we can see that Netherlands, Italy, France, Spain, and Germany are the countries in Europe which are mostly connected to great oil exporting countries. And analogously, we can see that the role of Germany and France is already mentioned, while the connection of the Netherlands with key oil exporting countries has grown in 2019. As for demand pool and technology push factors, on the demand pool side, we consider the implicit tax rate on energy, which is calculated as the ratio of energy tax revenue to final energy consumption. And as Galeotti and co-authors point out, in fossil fuel dependent country, a high value of the implicit tax rate of energy also lowers energy consumption, and so it can be considered as a proxy for the stringency of environmental policy. We also test an alternative demand pool factor, which is the share of GDP that is covered by environmental taxes. Turning to technology push factors, we calculate 2 main measures. The first is the stock of patents in climate change mitigation technologies that we calculate applying the perpetual inventory method with a decay rate of 15%. And the alternative technology push measure is represented by the patent intensity in climate change mitigation technologies of the public investment efforts in energy technologies, which we calculate as the ratio between the stock of patents in climate change mitigation technology and the stock of public R&D expenditure in the energy sector. So this is the complete data set that we use, and in addition to the variables I already explained, we have basic controls such as the share of urban population, real GDP, temperature change, oil price. Then we have energy intensity, which is measured as kilograms of oil equivalent on GDP, and which is a common measure of technological lock-in. Then we have a measure of comparative advantage or disadvantage in exporting low carbon technologies, which we get from the IMF, and assumes a value higher than 1 if a country has a comparative advantage in exporting these technologies, and a value lower than 1 if it has a disadvantage. Finally, we use this measure to evaluate the combined effect of the stock of patents in climate change mitigation technologies in those countries that have either a comparative advantage or disadvantage in exporting clean technologies. So As for the econometric framework, our dataset is based on a panel of the EU 27 countries between the period from 1999 to 2019. By conducting 2 different tests for cross-sectional dependence, we find that our database presents this issue. And to take into account this, we employ a generalized least square estimator that accounts for both the heterodastic and the correlated error structure, in particular specifying that there exists an AR1 autocorrelation process within panels whose coefficient is specific to each different country. So the final equation, we have that our measure of oil dependency, which is the weighted in degree centrality, is a function of demand pool, technology push, and proximity factors as represented by the eigenvector centrality, which stands for the privileged commercial relationships with oil exporting countries, and the degree of diversification of oil exporting countries, which is the Erfindel-Leishman index, plus a set of control variables and country and time fixed effects. So our main results show that the main sources of dependency on oil are, as expected, energy intensity, which represents the technological lock-in, and we can see that its coefficient is positive and statistically significant across all model specifications. And the other 2 main measures of the sources of dependence are the 2 proximity measures. In particular, we find that countries that diversify less the countries from which they import oil are more exposed to oil dependence. And the same is true for those countries that have established long-lasting privileged commercial relationships with key oil exporting countries, as proxied by the eigenvector centrality. Turning to demand pool and technology push factors, we find that an increase in the implicit tax rate on energy is always negative and significant, indicating that countries that implement stricter environmental policies can effectively reduce oil dependency. And the same is also true when we account for the share of GDP covered by environmental taxes instead of the implicit tax rate on energy. Turning to technology push factors, the effect of the patent stock in climate change mitigation technologies is very low in magnitude and negative and significant only in the 1st and the 4th model specification. Then we estimate as a robustness the effect of the patent intensity. And in this case, the effect is negative and significant. Then we try to answer the other 2 research questions by trying to uncover the possible mechanism that can lead technology push and demand pull factors to reduce effectively dependency on oil. So as a first step, we evaluate the combined effect of an increase in the implicit tax rate on energy with the trade dependency, which is proxied by the eigenvector centrality. And we can see from the negative and statistically significant coefficient that countries with stricter environmental regulations can effectively break this source of trade lock-in. And the same is also true for technological lock-in when we evaluate the combined effect of an increase in the implicit tax rate on energy and an increase in energy intensity. Then, given the mild result of the patent stock in climate change mitigation technology, we try to investigate whether there may exist a nonlinear effect in the stock of patents by evaluating the effects that the stock of patents in those countries that have a comparative advantage in exporting the same technologies can be different with respect to the countries that have a comparative disadvantage in exporting these technologies. So we combine the stock of patents respectively in countries that have a comparative advantage and a comparative disadvantage with the energy intensity. And what we find is that only those countries that can effectively succeed in exporting the countries that they patent can reduce oil dependency can reduce oil dependency through a reduction of technological lock-in as proxied by the energy intensity. So, in other words, the effect of innovation is only mitigating for oil dependency for those countries that have a comparative advantage in exporting clean technologies. So to conclude with this paper, we wanted to uncover the possible sources of divergence and heterogeneity in the level of oil dependence among European Union countries. And we found that the main sources of oil dependency are those trapped in a technological and institutional lock-in, as proxied by a high energy intensity of GDP, and also the ones that have established strong and privileged trade relations with key oil exporting countries that have a path dependence given by trade dependencies. We also found that demand pull and technology push policy instruments are effective in mitigating both types of path dependencies, but while demand pull policy instruments are a measure that can be successfully implemented for all European Union countries, technology push policy instruments are effective only for those countries that have a comparative advantage in exporting clean technologies. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. This is working, right? Hi, so Federica, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. It was a pleasure reading the article, and it's well written, and I think the results are very insightful. I would like to raise a couple of points, actually three, that hopefully you might find useful and could somehow help to the project. So the first one maybe is the most important one. All your variables in your regressions are in T.
Yes.
And independent variable. So I was wondering if you might have reverse causality. So the way you are selling your story, for example, you are saying that if you have a strong relationship with an oil producer, this will explain or could explain your dependency in terms of oil imports. But I could go the other way around. Because I don't have energy resources and therefore I'm oil dependent, I must search a strong relationship with a country that exports oil. So just because all your variables are in T, maybe you could explore legs or having one variable in T plus one, another variable in T to avoid the reverse causality issue. Okay, so a second point regards robustness checks. So the way you build your dependent variable, that is, I think it's very, very nice. But then maybe you could compare in the appendix, of course, with if the results are still there for a more naive maybe measure of oil dependence, that is like the share of oil in your energy mix. And your measure is more sophisticated, but if your results are still there for a more naive measure, that's insightful. That's from the dependent variable side. In terms of the controls, I was missing the degree of openness as one of the controls, because if your country is more open in terms of trade, this might influence both. Might influence some of your results. So that's in terms of controls, and then in terms of methodology, I was wondering if you guys consider whether to use alternative techniques, for example, GMM or system GMM. I don't know if that could also bring robustness. So the second comment is in terms of robustness checks. And then finally, a very superficial one. I was puzzled by demand pool. So when I was very interesting actually by it. So I read demand pool, but I was expecting something related to economic activity or aggregate demand. So demand pool inflation. Demand pool inflation, you have inflation caused by demand factors. But then the story for your demand pool mechanism is actually related to taxes. And during your presentation, you mentioned the stringence of environmental policy. So I don't know if there is a further reason why you refer to it as demand pool, or maybe you could consider using a different name like stringence of environmental policy or something like that. But okay. And thank you very much, and it was great reading it. Thank you.
Shall I answer now?
Yeah, I would collect a few questions if you have any. First, I take advantage from my position of chair. You have the please go. No, just a quick question, and I okay. Like also yours. My question is: would it make sense to include any geopolitical index in your control variables? That's my question. Please go on with yours.
You mentioned the environmental regulation. Why you don't make sense the other variable index provided by the OECD database that is related to the stringent environmental regulation that consider not also the market instrument, also non-market, and the incentives for the energy technology, for example, of the energy renewable, or consider, for example, the complexity of the production system, because the demand of the oil and the type of, of fuels used for the production of wood depends by the sophistication of the system. So these are simple indicators to provide.
No.
One. So yes, I agree with us. So something taking into consideration the structure of the economy.
Okay. So first, thank you very much, Marvin, for all your suggestions. This is a work in progress, so it's useful to take comments at this stage, and at the same time, we'll still have to do many robustness, both from the model side and from the inclusion of alternative variables. So it's very useful. Thank you. Just as for the last point, I think we refer to different demand pool instruments. The demand pool instruments that we consider in our paper are proper of the innovation literature, and the main demand pool instrument is usually composed by taxes. So maybe we refer to, yeah, exactly. But about the first 2 points, you are absolutely right. Thank you very much. As for your comment, Marco, you're right, and we are thinking about weighting the Herfindahl-Inchman index for the political stability of exporting countries. Of the countries from which they import. And so, yes, this is something we have to take into account. And finally, the EPS index, we could test for it as a robustness, even though I think that the main 2 sides of the APS are captured by our implicit tax rate on energy and the technology push side. So, I mean, it's like we decompose the index and account for the main dimensions. But yes, of course, there is a remaining part, such as the titles which are exchanged on the market. So yes, and also the structure of the economy is something we should take into account. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. You are the next presenter, right?
I don't know.
No, you're not.
You're the boss. I don't
Oh, that's good. I like it. Yeah. The next presenter. You are the next one.
I think the T is the next.
I am.
You are.
You say it. You say you are the next presenter.
Okay, thank you. So as you 20 minutes and then 5 minutes for
If you could
discussion.
kind of tell me when there's 5 minutes, when I have 5 minutes, so I'll try to run, but.
So good afternoon. Good afternoon, actually, everyone. Thank you very much for having me today. The title of my presentation is Endogenous Political Cleavages and the Economics of Climate Change. And this is a project with two dear friends, Christian Proagno from Bamberg and Serena Sordi from the University of Siena. Now, in a recent paper in the Quarterly Journal of Economics, 2022, Piketty and co-authors document a major transformation in Western politics. So if you go back to the 50s, 50s, 60s, and even 70s, what happens is that the left was supported by the poor and less educated voters, while the right or right-wing parties were supported by highest earnings and most educated voters. Now, this changes, and 50 years later, we're talking about the 2000s, 2010, now the left-wing parties continue to be supported by the poor, right-wing parties continue to be supported by the rich, but left and center parties are supported now by the most educated voters, while the right-wing parties now by the less educated voter. Now, the forces behind this apparent disconnect between education and income effects, they remain somehow controversial. There is not a consensus about the framework to place the analysis. Still there is a recognition that an explanation cannot limit itself to economic distributive considerations, but one should take into account social cultural aspects, and the environment and environmental attitudes might be an important piece of that puzzle. In fact, the rise of green parties, according to Piketty and co-authors' findings, the rise of green parties explains around 15% of the income educational reversal and half. So we're talking about 50% of the positive link between education and left support. Now we believe, and that's our starting point, that heterogeneity is a relevant ingredient in this process. Heterogeneity, a process that is intrinsically dynamic in nature. So what we will try to do here is to develop a macrodynamic model to study the feedback effects in two political dimensions. So one political dimension is the economic distributive, and the other is the social cultural. But we want to study the interaction between these two dimensions with human capital accumulation. So we're talking about education and the environment, because the environment also seems to be an important piece of this puzzle. So to anticipate a little bit our contribution, at the end we end up with a three-dimensional nonlinear dynamical system when the political decision in the economic distributive axis it depends on a left and right along similar lines of the Gilmy and collaborators in a couple of papers and in Gibo, and the social cultural green and left right, it's related to the environment, supporters and those that support or are against the green agenda, and this will follow some recent work by me, Serena, Christian, and others. Now, the composition of the population, what is crucial for us is that the composition of the population changes endogenously, not given. It changes endogenously following a continuous version of the discrete choice approach. The literature is started by Brock Holmes in the econometrica paper back in the 90s. And an important result for us is that the system is compatible with multiple equilibria. So the system admits 1, 3, and 9, up to 9 equilibrium points, which opens the door for studying the basins of attraction. And that's an important part of our work here. Of course, this is work in progress, and your comments and suggestions are very much welcome. So I will not bore you with equations and equations. I will try to sell a story. So our main story is the following. Look, we have two political dimensions, the economic distributive one and the social cultural dimension. So from the economic distributive, you can be left and right, okay? And depending on the composition of the population, you will decide what kind of educational investment you will have. And you will decide also how much to tax the skill premium, okay? Now, depending on your educational investments and how much you're taxing the skill premium, you will have a certain amount of skilled workers, and you also have a wage differential. The wage differential is a measure of inequality, so you will have a certain amount of inequality in this economy. This inequality will feed back on your economic distributive political decision, will also feed back on output, on the economic activity, which enters again your decision in who you're going to vote, left or right. Okay, that's in the economic distributive part of the story. What about the social cultural dimension? Social cultural dimensions includes gender considerations about race, migration, but also the environment. So we take ceteris paribus, everybody constant except the environmental. Depending on the composition of the population regarding these environmental sentiments, you will choose your mitigation investments, how much you are going to tax CO2 emissions. Now, how much you tax CO2 emissions will influence emissions. But of course, a subproduct of production, of output, are emissions too. And both of them feed back in how you're going to vote from a social cultural point of view, left or right, from a social cultural point of view. Now, these channels we study both analytically and numerically. Two additional channels we're going to study only numerically, that is, the feedback from CO2 emissions to human capital accumulation, because there is some empirical evidence indicating that environmental degradation damages your human capital stock, either because it reduces cognitive abilities of the young, or because heat waves reduce the number of days that you attend school, the quality of the education you receive. And the second is that taxing CO2 emissions seems to be, there's empiric evidence suggesting that is very regressive from a distributional point of view. Okay, so we could think at least that example helps me to think that the rich can go with Tesla and you have to go with Pandino. So at the end, you are paying the CO2 tax because you're emitting and the rich is not. Okay, so the carbon tax is regressive. Okay, so we take into account also for this effect on the wage differential. Now, as I said, the population is divided between left and right in these two dimensions, the economic distributive and the social cultural. Changing the political views are endogenously, so they change following the discrete choice approach. And your decision from an economic point of view, who to vote, depends on three main factors. The first factor is a group effect. And what is a group effect is that if you are surrounded by left-wing people, you're more likely to vote left. If you're surrounded by right-wing people, you're more likely to vote right. The second effect is the accountability effect. What is accountability effect? Is that if the economy is growing, but the coalition that is in power is a left-wing coalition, this increases the probability that you will vote left. But if the economy is doing well and the party in power or the coalition in power is right-wing, this increases the probability that you vote right. And finally, we assume that people are inequality averse. So if inequality is increasing, this increases the probability that you will vote left-wing. Okay? In the social cultural axis, as I anticipated, we take everybody else as constant, as a parameter, and we focus on emissions. We concentrated on emissions. Okay, so people will respond to emissions, and in principle, this sign could be positive or negative. What is important for us is that we build an index for the economic distributive and the social cultural political axis, and this index in both cases goes between -1 and 1. You can assume any value between -1 and 1. What is important is that if x is equal to 1, it means that or it's positive. From an economic point of view, the majority is right wing. But if x is negative, or is leaning towards -1, the majority of the population is left wing. From an economic point of view. The same for phi. Phi is for the social cultural axis between -1 and 1. If phi is equal to 1, everybody is right wing. Everybody denies or is not supportive of climate mitigation policies. If phi goes to -1, everybody supports mitigation, but the adoption of a higher carbon tax and so on and so forth. Okay. The production technology is very simple. It's a Leontief between energy and labor, and we have two types of workers: the high skill and the low skill. Okay, we have substitutability between them. We don't have substitutability with energy, but we do have substitutability between types of workers. And using a Cobb-Douglas just for keeping the algebra simple, we're able to obtain a measure, our sigma, that is a measure of inequality. It's the wage premium, the skill premium. Okay, CO2 emissions, our pollution, depends on production. So production is related to a coefficient that captures the amount, how dirty your technology is. And here we come to the connection between the political system and the economy. So human capital accumulation depends on two incentives. Private incentives that are basically the skill premium. Why do you accumulate skills? Because you want to make more money. That's a skill premium here. Or non-private incentives or public incentives that come from taxing the wage differential. But you're going to tax the wage differential depending on the coalition that is in power. So if there is a left-wing coalition, you will tax the skill premium. If you have a right-wing coalition from an economic point of view, you will not tax the skill premium, you might even subsidize it. Now, from the social cultural point of view, the carbon tax will depend on the composition of the population between left and right in the social cultural axis. So if the left, you have a left coalition, social cultural, you adopt a higher carbon tax. If you have a right coalition, social cultural, you will not adopt, you might even subsidize carbon, dirty production techniques. You put all these things together, you do a lot of annoying algebra, and you get to a three-dimensional system. A three-dimensional system that has the following equilibrium conditions, and is compatible with unique equilibrium solution or multiple equilibrium solutions. Up to 9. And this is the case that we're interested. Why is this the case that we're interested? Because we have up to 9 solutions when beta 1 is greater than 1. What does it mean that beta 1 is greater than 1? That you care a lot about other people's opinion. So you care about how your friends are voting. If you don't care how your friends are voting, you reduce the number of equilibria. But if you care a lot, this group effect is sufficiently strong, you can get a greater number of equilibria, but also if you care a lot about pollution. Because if you don't care about pollution, again, you have a smaller number of equilibria. But if you care a lot, if you respond, your attitudes respond to pollution, you can get these 9 equilibria. And we're interested in these 9 equilibria, and I will tell you why. We're interested on that. We have a calibration. We try to follow some magnitudes that you find in the literature. Why is this important? Because of these 9 equilibria, only 4 are stable. And these 4 stable equilibria are the 4 possible political combinations. You can have a right-right. What is a right-right? Right from an economic point of view and right from a social cultural point of view. That's the blue. The blue is a right-right coalition. You can have a green coalition. A green coalition is a right-left. What is a right-left? You're right from an economic point of view, but left from a social cultural point of view. You could have a red coalition, a left-right. You are left from an economic point of view, but then from social cultural values, you are very conservative. You are more right-wing. And you can have a magenta coalition that is a left-left. You are pure left, so to speak. You are left in both dimensions. But what we show here, this is the basis of attraction. So what does it mean? The colors indicate all initial conditions converging to that stable equilibrium point. So what I'm telling you is that if inequality is very high, your starting inequality is very high, you can only go or to the red equilibrium or to the blue equilibrium. But if inequality is intermediate, you have the full 4 possibilities. And we try to link in the paper this to this transition from the 50s to the 2000s. So what was happening in the 50s is the inequality was very high. So you were not caring about the social cultural dimension. The only 2 equilibria that you could converge were either the red or the blue. The red or the blue are right-wing from a social cultural point of view. You can have right or left from an economic point of view. But as you reduce inequality during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, then inequality falls, and for intermediate level inequality, you have all four possible equilibrium being actual possibilities in the economy. So this breaks the link between education and income. And at least that's an argument that we try to make through the paper. Then how much time do I have? 6.5. I will use those 30 seconds. I did that. So what we play a little bit with the model is that what happens is that people care more about private incentives than public incentives. And what happens if people, the opposite case, people care more about public incentives rather than private incentives. So if people care more about the private, the skill premium when they get educated, the two most likely equilibria to emerge are the magenta and the blue, pure cases, left, right. But if people care less about the skill premium, they care more about public incentives, intrinsic motives, then the equilibrium most likely to arrive is the green and the red. They are the impure equilibrium. You are either left, right, or right, left. These are the most, and we have a discussion in the article why this is the case. We have a discussion in the paper also about secularization. What happens if there is a trend of secularization? People stop go. There is a discussion in the literature of political science that people have become less religious, they are attending less church. So there is a trend of secularization. So in our paper, this will mean that the rho SC, all that captures all variables that matter for being social, cultural, right or left, but you are not taking into account into the model. So we assume it's negative. So there is this trend to be left wing from a social, cultural point of view. And we play with the model. What happens if this trend is weak, and what happens if this trend is strong? I'm fine. Thank you. So if the trend is weak, you will fall in a situation, the two only possible equilibria are the red and the blue. But if this trend is strong, you can only have a green or a magenta equilibria as possible solutions. Now, this result that I'm going to show now is for us is an important result, because then you say, okay, now we addressed the likeness of different coalitions, right, left, right. What about emissions? What is happening to emissions? Let's say that we managed to form a coalition that is left-wing from a social cultural point of view. So we agree that we need to adopt a carbon tax. Is pollution coming down? Are we able to decouple, to achieve full decoupling? And that's what we try to study under weak secularization and under strong secularization. So under weak secularization, we are unable to find really decoupling. So emissions fall, but they are always positive. Under strong secularization, if you look at the blue and the orange line, emissions fall, the rate of growth of emissions fall, but it's still positive. Only in the yellow line you are able to obtain negative rate of growth of emissions. The yellow line corresponds to a case in which technology strongly responds to the carbon tax. So I believe this is also an important result for us, because forming a coalition that wants to fight climate change is only the first part of the problem. And that's a message that we want our paper to give. The second part of the problem is that you need enough induced technical change. The carbon tax needs to induce a significantly change in technology capable of completing the transition to carbon neutral production techniques. And if you don't have that last step, we will not be able to achieve or to complete the transition, the green transition. So finally, our last result, and I will use my last two minutes for that, is that what happens if there is a feedback from pollution and from the carbon tax to inequality that I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation? So what we found is that here in the left graph we have phi x, so economic distributive social cultural access and income inequality up. What happens is that if we have this feedback from inequality from pollution to inequality, and private incentives matter more than public incentives to get educated, the only stable equilibria is the green coalition. Is a right-wing coalition from an economic point of view, and a left-wing coalition from a social cultural point of view. The green German party, so to speak. While the magenta and the red coalitions are not stable and actually lead to the emergence of a limit cycle. While countries in the basing of attraction of these points, they from an economic point of view will be left, but from a social cultural point of view, they will alternate periods. They will support or oppose climate mitigation policies. And an inverse situation happens if you care more about public incentives rather than private incentives to get education. So to conclude, some final considerations. So we try to build a macrodynamic model to study this interaction between politics, the economy, and the environment. And we associated the human capital accumulation to these public versus private incentives, and the social cultural dimension of the problem, we reduce it to the environmental issue. And maybe the most important result to highlight here in these last minutes of the presentation is that the system is compatible with 4 stable equilibrium points. A left-left, a right-right, a left-right, and a right-left coalitions, combination of these political domains that we feel is an important part of the story, because we kind of summarize it as a discussion between left and right, but you have left parties that for some things are behaving as left, but for others are behaving as right. So we feel that the framework we develop here somehow enriches this discussion. And finally, we would like to highlight that achieving equilibrium with 0 emissions is something that is not granted. Even when you have strong environmental support, you need technology to respond. You need some sort of induced technical change. So thank you very much. And obrigado, because I'm also Brazilian, so thank you for your time. In which dimension?
Which dimensions? But I left because I study environmental dimension in the ecological transition. So thank you, Davila, for the presentation. The paper is very interesting because this debate one of the most issues about the ecological transition, the relationship between the social and environmental dimension of the economic growth from a political perspective. In particular, analyze the political conflict in achieving social, environmental, economic objectives and the political motivations behind the introduction on environmental fiscal policies. In this case, we consider the environmental taxes. It's very rich, not only in the analytical part, but I read the article also to present numerical simulations. You have a questions about the determinants of the social dimensions. You consider the green attitude, but you consider only the individual perception about the environmental degradation or the effect of the climate change. For example, you cannot consider also group effect also for the environmental attitude, the green attitude, as you consider for the economic dimension. Because if you live in a society with a higher environmental awareness, you have a certain awareness about the problem or the ecological problem. And another question is the effect of education on the green attitude. You consider the effect of the education investment in the economic dimensions. But for example, the education can have an impact also on the green attitude, because, for example, for awareness campaign about the climate change or the environmental degradation. So you consider this effect or is captured by the exogenous parameter in the model?
Okay. Thanks. This was very interesting and very rich. So you feel ashamed to ask for something more, but I was wondering, is this a closed economy model? So I think that, of course, international trade would add to the both environmental and the distributional aspect quite a lot.
Well, I'm not sure which question I have to choose. Well, you choose or mix so many variables very important, and I understand why you said that almost the social or environmental variables, or some of them, are like ceteribus paribus. But my question is, I don't know if I'm not sure or if I understand well by which mean it's the transition mechanism to choose or to impact. I mean, the impact through the political choose to left or right, and this, and the emissions. I mean, it's, since this is a dynamic model, it means that there's a political decision. Yeah, I know that you show, yes, that's that one, but I think I cannot like understand very well the mechanism. I don't know if you can to explain a little bit more.
I have a quick one. Can you just provide an example? I mean, that your model is able to capture a real world example. I mean, Brazil in 1992, Italy 2020, or something like that.
So thank you very much for the points you raised. So I will start with the first two of Chiara. So the sociocultural determinants, and you're basically exploring the link with environmental degradation, with pollution, right? Agents respond to pollution. But what about other effects? For example, the group effect. And I completely agree with that. So originally, this is a project that we started some years ago, 5 years ago, and our starting point was green attitudes. What is behind green attitudes? So we have a couple of papers, 2 or 3 papers, only with the green attitudes part of the problem. And we study the group effect, we study the response to pollution, the response to employment, because you could also say that if the employment is high or low, you have some sort of, you care more or less about the environment. And so we've done that. But then we got to a stage that we say, we are very much interested to see this political dimension interact with others. And then we have to cut somewhere. And in this project in particular, we said, let's focus on the response to pollution, because this allows a clear connection with the rest of the economy, because pollution is a subproduct, or emissions are a subproduct of economic activity. So that's a bridge that we can maintain. But I definitely agree with you that there's a lot happening in the group effect. It's part of that, and we could include that. Yeah. Okay, so that's one thing. And the effect of education on attitudes, I think it makes completely sense. So if your population is more educated, they should have a feedback on green attitudes. We haven't done that. And I would be eager to see something in that direction. Yeah. So about being a closed economy, this is a closed economy model. Thank you for raising this point. This is a closed economy model. We started this as an open economy project, an open economy that was balance of payments constrained. So our initial motivation back in 2019-18, when we started working with this, was an economy that was like Brazil. So we have environmental sentiments and an external constraint, a la Thirlwall. But then it's difficult to sell the external constraint in certain audiences. So we kind of jumped to a closed economy, and that's why we have a closed economy here. Okay. So about the mechanics of the political decision. So what we're thinking is the following: you have your population, and your population can decide or has opinions that are either left or right in two topics: economic distributive topics or social cultural topics. So depending on how the population is divided in the economic topics, you have a majority formed there. Let's say the majority is right wing in economic topics. But then this population is also divided in social cultural in the social cultural dimension. So let's say they are majority left wing. So the government that is going to emerge, the coalition that is going to govern this population, is going to be a right wing from an economic point of view, but the left wing from a social cultural point of view. So what kind of policy this coalition will adopt? Well, from an economic point of view, this coalition will not tax the skill premium because they are right wing from the economics. So they will leave inequality untouched. But they care about the environment because they are left wing from a social cultural point of view. So they will adopt a carbon tax, a very high carbon tax. And then you have the economic and outcomes that follow. That's an example of how the mechanics that you have in mind. But thank you for the opportunity to clarify this. Indeed, there's a lot going on, and yeah. And then finally, an example of the real world. I don't have an example of one country to give you. What we wanted to do in this stage is to develop a framework that, in our opinion, doesn't exist formally and from an heterogeneous agents behavioral perspective, that allows us to have these four coalitions as an outcome, as a political outcome. But if I was to push the model, I'm pushing it a little bit to give some historical or country experience. I will try to think in terms of the transition from the 50s to nowadays. And in the 50s, before the Second World War, inequality was very high. So in the context of the model, and we see this in the basins of attraction, in the baseline scenario, when inequality was very, very high, so let's think pre-war, inequality very high, you don't care about the social cultural. In this case, social culture is the environment, but there was not much room. The discussion goes to the economic distributive. You have, in the social culture, everybody's conservative. And everybody was conservative, we could think, in the pre-war period. And the debates were in the left-right economic distributive. But when you reduce inequality to intermediate levels, and this happened in the immediate post-war period, 50s and 60s, then you open the door to discuss other aspects, not only the economic aspects, the social cultural too, that in the context of this model is the environment. It doesn't have to be. And then you have a richer range of political arrangements that can emerge that were not possible before. But I will stop there because I'm pushing the model a little bit too much. Thank you. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. No, that definitely. No, thank you, thank you, and thank you, and I try to be careful. I'm saying I'm pushing the model because not only about the blue collar, white collar, we could say that the environment was not even an issue in the pre-war period. We were not aware of global warming or anything. So I'm pushing the model and clearly a little bit too much, but yeah. We don't have capital here. This is just high skill, low skill, and energy. So we don't even have, for example, a capitalist class or anything of that kind. Still, we hope the contribution is somehow useful by showing the ability of having this richer set of political arrangements that, to the best of our knowledge, is something kind of new. Thank you.
Good afternoon, I am Chiara Grazini. Today I present the paper Policy Coordination for the Ecological Structural Change, a Macroeconomic Modeling, developed by co-authors Marco Di Tommaso, José Luis Aurelio da Costa, Aurelio Marco and Giulio Guarini. So, I would like to present the conceptual framework of the paper. Two of the most pressing issues today is represented by the environmental degradation and the income distribution or the employment that have allowed me to analyze the relationship between the social and environmental dimension of the economic growth, as in the previous presentation. In particular, the ecological challenge can be faced throughout an ecological transition based on the ecological, technological property, and ecological structural change. Already in Daly in 1991, I would need to incorporate the environmental issue in the macroeconomic framework used to analyze the policy. And within the macroeconomic framework, the post-Keynesian toolkit contains powerful analytical and policy tools for achieving environmental objectives. So we can analyze the policy prescription using the post-Keynesian framework. Understand that permits to understanding the distribution, production, aspect to achieve social goals. Because they assume that the market cannot alone orient all kind of action to achieving green targets. And we can see now a debate about how to govern, promote, and coordinate this state of change. And in particular, when, as I said before, the ecological transition is based on ecological structural change that requires smart macroeconomic policy for fostering innovation and upstream production process. And particularly because when you consider the different type of policies, its ability to internalize the negative externality in the price of goods and services, the effectiveness of the environmental fiscal policy is debated today because they can produce a rebound effect. And more we can consider the industrial policy that represent an holistic approach that can promote competitiveness, innovation, and environmental sustainability. But at the same time, the industrial policy, in particular the industrial policy that can apply in the short term, would be ineffectiveness. And also the ecological transition requires huge public investment. So another possible green monetary policy could act on the grid differentiate reserve requirement. I don't explain these are a sort of political proposed by the Campillo in 2016, but they can explain that this type of policy could be in effect in developing countries. So the ecological transition requires several transformations in several sectors, so it's impossible for the ecological structural change go smooth without policy coordination. So we cannot apply a single type of policy to achieve the ecological transition. So, and in particular because the ecological transition requires the development and implementation of revolutionary green technology, but we can see the diffusion of this type of technology only in the long term, and in the short term they require huge investment. So we need of a sort of the ecological policies that we have defined as all industrial macroeconomic policies that aim to promote, sustain, and favor the ecological structural change. So in particular, with this paper, want to highlight how the policy coordination is essential to ensure the effectiveness of the environmental policy that introduced this type of the ecological structural change. In particular, this paper won't contribute to the literature in the first time introducing the environmental issue in the macroeconomic framework and throughout a sort of echo version of the Keynesian cross that want to highlight the trade-off between the social and environmental dimensions of the economic growth. And the second contribution presents a negative equation model to explain how we can integrate industrial, fiscal, and monetary policy to achieve environmental sustainability. So, And the first part of the paper is related to the introduction on eco-Keynesian flows. In particular, it is represented by two different graphs. The first graph is the traditional AD curves, and the second graph is represent the sustainability criteria that we have defined starting from the IPAT identity that explains the relationship between output and the pollution concentration. In particular, the environmental impact depends on the population, the GDP, and the GDP and the technology. So we identify the level of the pollution as a function of the environmental efficiency, that is the ratio between the output and the level of the green emission of the economy, and we identify the equilibrium point. So recognizing the unsustainability of the current economic growth, policymakers set up the goal to maintain the increase of the global temperature below the 2 Celsius degree. So we introduce in the model a stringent sustainable target represented by the HS, and we try to identify the possible strategy to respect this goal. In particular, we identify two different strategies. The first is represented by the sustainable growth, a decrease in GDP as a result of reduction in the large scale resource intensity, a reduction of the production. But this strategy shift the cars AD from AD to 81, but in this study allow to improve the environmental sustainability, but at the same time they can reduce the economic growth. So this is sustainable because we have to achieve an inclusive and sustainable economic growth. The second strategy is represented by the ecological policies, so that we have to increase the environmental efficiency, the production system to reduce its pollution intensity, and we consider an increase of the autonomous green public and private expenditure. So this permits to shift the curve AD from the AD to AD2, and the increase of the environmental efficiency reduce the slope of the second curve, so we can achieve simultaneously an inclusive and sustainable economic growth. So this example, this is a simple macroeconomic model that allows to highlight the existence of a possible trade-off that is by policymakers to achieve social and environmental objectives. So, in particular, this model aligned the need of the policy coordination because the ecological policies, we want to increase the environmental efficiency, but at the same time, this increase can determine an increase of the final consumption, so it can create a sort of rebound effect, and to if public investment reduce pollution intensity and increase income through the multiplier principle and increase employment, we can see an increase of the net level of the emission. So the ecological policy represents a win-win strategy only in the case if the income multiplier of green investment can be higher than the effect of this investment on the environmental efficiency. So this allows the economy to achieve the point B. Then we try to set up an eco version of the three equation model to analyze the way to coordinate fiscal, environmental, and monetary policy, and we developed an eco version of the three equation model developed by Carlin and Soghi in 2009. Introducing to analyze the impact of the ecological structural change, modifying the Phillips curve. The final, I not present all the equation of the model. The final model is composed by 4 equations. The curve that represents the combination of the linear output and the current inflation level that allow to maintain the aggregate demand and the output equal. Then we consider the Phillips curve that incorporates the ecological structural chain. We are assuming that in economy are using an intermediate input presented by energy that produce negative externalities in terms of the greenhouse emissions. Then, because the aim of the economic development in this case is to obtain an inclusive and environmental industrial development, macroeconomic policymakers to consider two different constraints in the model. We introduce a social sustainability curve that represents the social sustainability, the social constraint, the EASS curve, that is the level of the output that made the for which the union and firms are satisfied with the level of the real wage. Then we consider the environmental sustainability curve, that is the level of the oil compatible with the target level of the energy, that is dependent by the energy efficiency, the pollution intensity of the production of the energy, and we introduce a sustainable pollution level, a sort of the environmental target. In particular, the AD curves depend on the level of total expenditure represented by A, and the target inflation, because we consider we are assuming that the central bank introduce a strike inflation target. So we are assuming that the central bank is adverse to the inflation, and the BC curve depends on the expected inflation and the relative price of the energy. And we identify the equilibrium point in the short term, and we can see that the policymaker face a trade-off with the environmental and the social sustainability. So then we try to identify the possible strategy to achieve the inclusive and environmental sustainability. In particular, we analyze the case of the expansionary ecological policies. So we consider an increase of the green autonomous expenditure. In particular, this allows to increase the environmental efficiency of the production system, and the increase of the environmental efficiency increase the green productivity that allow to shift the sustainability, the environmental sustainability constraint to the right. Then we consider the increase of the environmental efficiency allow to reduce the energy and operational cost of the production. So the BC curve shift to the right. The other demand shift the curve AD. So this strategy allow to achieve to increase the environmental sustainability at the same time to move the economy throughout the sustainability constraint. In particular, we select the energy as an intermediate input because it is represent an essential driver of the production system. Also, it's important in the current geographical context characterized by rising energy prices. So we consider in the second case an inflationary shock produced an exogenous increase in the energy prices. And in particular, we compare the traditional monetary policy to respond to an inflationary shock to a possible ecological policy coordination scenario. To respond to an inflation shock about an increase in energy price, the mainstream policy strategy is to a conservative central bank to increase that decide to increase the interest rate. This decision move the BC curve to the left, but to a few times. The central bank decided to increase the central rate, but according to the Taylor principle, the increase in the actual level of inflation requires a more than a proportional increase in the level of the nominal interest rate to reduce the level of the output and employment, force a decrease in expected inflation. So the PC curve shifts to the left for the increase on the energy price, but they return to come back. So this type of policy cannot allow to achieve the environmental and social sustainability, because move the economy in the original position that is unsustainable. Also, we consider the possible effect of financial speculation can move can worsen the situation, shifting the PC curve maintain the curve to the left, the PC curve to the left, because the financial speculation increase the volatility of the energy, of the oil and the natural gas pricing, for example, and create inflation bubbles. So the possible strategy to achieve the environmental and the social sustainability is represented by an ecological policy strategy. We consider more central that the central bank assume a less austere monetary policy. So the parameter beta is reduced. So it is allowed to shift the PC curve from the PC1 to PC2, and we consider that the central bank, the less austere monetary policies, meaning that they increase the interest rate less than in the previous case. So the slight increase in the real interest rate boosts the investment. In particular, this have a particular impact on the green investment, because they are more sensitive to the interest rate, because general green technology are more capital intensive. So the curve is more steeper. So, and we consider also that this strategy allows to stimulate public and private investment in green technology. So this permits to shift the AD curve to the right, the PC curve shift from PC2 to PC3, and the increase of the environmental efficiency allows to shift to the right the environmental constraint. So we can achieve a sort of we have a more sustainable economic growth. At the same time, we are more closer to the social sustainability. To conclude, the ecological transition requires an ecological structural change that is they need ecological policy that promote the structure that increase the shift the resource and the labor from run sector to green sector. In particular, we present an eco-Keynesian cross to show the possible trade-off between social and environmental objectives, and then showed out the growth strategy, the ecological degrowth impose a substantial economic cost is not a sustainable path or growth path. So is instead to promote sustainable ecological and to promote the sustainable and inclusive growth is necessary a coordination between industrial, fiscal, and monetary policy. So the three question model are the possible strategy to obtain a policy coordination to achieve environmental sustainability, and in particular the energy pressure case highlight the effectiveness of the mainstream monetary policy in response to the ecological challenge. So they want to show that the mainstream dichotomy between the central bank and government, between monetary and fiscal policy, and we can respond to the ecological challenge. And we need that require coordination between a lesser monetary policy and expand ecological, industrial, and fiscal policies. Thank you.
Thank you. You will. Well, so dear discussant, again, is
online. Yes.
Is he online? Can you hear us?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, of course. Please go on with the discussion of the paper.
Thank you, thank you. Congratulations to Professor Grazini. It's a
Can we
very
see
easy.
you? Just a second. Let's try to check whether we can see you. Do you have your camera on?
Yes, I do.
So we can try something like that, and then perhaps we can see you somewhere. we do have an expert here, so yeah, I hope so.
Why is that?
Which could be useful also for your presentation.
Yes, of course.
Okay, we can see him in the corner. But...
Okay, we can see you. So Marcus, so there's a typo in the official program. Anyway, please go on with the discussion of the paper.
Okay. First, my congratulations to Professor Grazini and the co-authors. It's a very easy to read article. It's a very pleasure read. In my line of research, it's Latin America and developing countries. And as I was reading the article, one thought came to my head that about the YSS, the equilibrium, social equilibrium, right? And in all of the scenarios of obtaining the ecological equilibrium, we never get to the social equilibrium. That's logical, right? My question goes in the direction of, in developing countries where the social equilibrium, in my view, could be far to the right, very far from where the equilibrium, the output equilibrium is, and very far from the output equilibrium for ecological equilibrium. Doesn't that make the proposition of obtaining ecological equilibrium far from what social equilibrium would be very the trade-off very costly? You know, can you understand my question?
Yes, we can hear you.
Professor Grazini, could you understand my question?
Yes. Yeah, you have any other question or?
Just that.
Okay.
Okay, so we collect other questions first. I do have a question for you. If I understood your model, you don't have an explicit monetary rule in your model. The monetary rule is embedded in the aggregate demand curve. If I were you, I would have an explicit monetary rule equation, perhaps not in the representation, because otherwise you would need a 3D representation, but just for the analytical description of your model. Do we have other questions? There, to you. I chose you, just it was a trick. Other questions? No, so please feel free to reply.
Yes, in the model, we explicitate the monetary rule, used by the central bank to set up the interest rate, but then we enter the level of the interest rate in the curve, so in the yes, we put it together but in the analytical model of the paper, all equations are explicited. Then we have, because our aim was to create a simple macroeconomic model to start to analyze the environmental dimension or the possible policy coordination about the ecological related to the ecological challenge. So we set up all the equation. We want to create a simple system, a simple final system, and we use a traditional model, so to set up the monetary rule. For the equation on Marcos, we know the trade-off between environmental and social sustainability. We start from the idea of the paper starts from the concept of the just transition. So the just transition movement want to obtain environmental sustainability at the same time to reduce inequality in the labor market. So, and but it's very difficult in this model introduce our focus was the environmental dimension, so we prefer to analyze the environmental constraints, and we stop a sort of we introduce the social constraint to represent the inclusive and sustainable the industrial development aim, for example, of policies, but we treat them as an exogenous constraint. But we know that there is a trade-off between the two different dimensions. They require added cost.
And the next speaker is Marcus. Can you share your screen? I guess you
yes,
can do that.
I will share. Okay. Can you see my screen?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Please go on with your presentation. We can see the screen, not your face, but the screen.
Thank you. Okay. So welcome everybody. I will present my paper. The title is The Impact of Trade Liberalization and Exchange Rate Undervaluation on Exports, Imports, and Trade Balance of Latin America Countries. This essay, it's in honor of Anthony Thirlwall. A brief introduction to the motifs behind this paper, this work. This paper is based on my thesis, bachelor thesis that I did in University of Brasilia. By the way, I'm Marcos, I'm from University of Brasilia. And while I was doing the research to choose a theme for my thesis, Professor Oreiro, that's co-author of Grazini, he recommended to me a book by Anthony Thirlwall that's Economic Growth in an Open Developing Economy. It's a very well-known book in the field. And there Thirlwall presents the idea that trade liberalization reforms in developing countries can deteriorate the trade balance and the balance of payments through the effect of the growth of imports being far greater than the growth of exports. And Thirlwall shows the paper he did together with Santos Paulino, where they test this hypothesis with, I believe, was around 60 countries through a 30-year time frame, and that's the idea for my paper came from, to take the methodology used by Thirlwall and redirect the analysis to Latin America and extend the time frame to almost the present, so we can see the long-run effects, medium long-run effects of these trade liberalizations on Latin American countries. And another addition that we made together with Oreiro was a suggestion of the professor, was to incorporate the role of exchange rate level, not just exchange rate as they change year to year, the first difference of exchange rate, but level of exchange rate. We'll get more into that later in the methodology, but that was an addition to the work. Okay, and unfortunately, as many of you may know, Anthony Thirlwall passed away last year while I was doing my thesis. And although it's very sad, I believe that the thesis, the paper, and this very presentation serves as a reminder of his legacy to the field of economics. Going forward, just for the working part of the paper, the hypotheses we use are: first, trade liberalization causes a negative effect on trade balance of developing countries. This is the hypothesis that they were already tested together with Santos Paulino in a large group of countries, and we are testing this again for Latin America in a bigger time frame. And the second hypothesis, it's exchange rate undervaluation has a relevant effect on trade balance of developing countries. And the second hypothesis calls for the addition we made in the work, that exchange rate undervaluation level has a relevant effect, not just the changes that occur naturally year by year, but the level of the exchange rate. So getting to the methodology of the paper, the data used was the countries on the sample was Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, Mexico, and Uruguay. Some of them I say with my Portuguese accent, some of them in English, but those are the countries. And the time frame used was since 1970 all the way to 2019. The two main variables of attention in this work are lib, that's the liberalization dummy, and how this liberalization dummy works is the same methodology used by Thirlwall. The liberalization dummy has value 0 for all those years before the trade liberalization reforms, and has a value 1 after these reforms. And they start their year for the lib having value 1, it's unique to each country. So each country has its own set of data for lib. That's the liberalization dummy that captures the effect of the period that the economy has trade liberalized. Okay. And the underval is the other variable of analysis. That's the index of exchange rate undervaluation. This variable is made upon the works of Roderick, a 2008 article called Growth and Exchange Rate, I believe, or Exchange Rate and Growth, I believe was the title, where he proposes a methodology to calculate an index of undervaluation that it's based upon the Balassa-Samuelson effect for countries. So he takes the real exchange rate and regresses by the per capita GDP of each country, and the residual of this regression is the overvaluation or undervaluation of the currency rate, exchange rate. So this index tells us if the currency of each country each year, based on Balassa-Samuelson effect, it's overvaluated or undervaluated. Okay. So for the model in itself, there will be 3 sets of regressions, each one corresponding to one of the dependent variables under study. That's exports, imports, and the trade balance. Exports and imports are growth of the exports and growth of the imports, and trade balance is the ratio of trade balance over GDP, so it's a percentage. And each set of regressions will feature 2 versions of the model. The first version is a simpler fixed effects model with the explanatory variables, and the second one will include interactions between the variables to capture the effects of elasticity changes following the liberalization reforms. In the paper of Santos Paulino and Thirlwall, they explain that after the liberalizing reforms, exports and imports may change its elasticities regarding price and income. So we add in the second version of the models in each one those elasticities interactions. So just to show you an example, these are the results of the regressions for exports. As you can see, we have the explanatory variables lagged exports, the world income, that's W, underval, that's the index for undervaluation. Those C 1982 and C 2008 are dummy crisis for the crisis of the debt crisis in America Latina, in Latin America, and in financial crisis. And we have lib, that's the dummy for liberalization. In the second version, we add the interaction between lib and world income, and the interaction between lib and undervaluation. As you can see, we have R squared of 14 and 16. That's not very high, but I will not get into the numbers, the results in itself right now. We have a section to discuss those results, but I wish I like to show you the results for exports and imports. Those are the results for imports. Is the same structure. We have lagged imports, the national income, that's Y, and the other variables are the same. And we have a very much higher R squared, that's over 50. And lastly, the results for trade balance, we have all the same variables, world income, national income. We have all those interactions in the second version. And we have also a new variable that's terms of trade that can capture the changes year to year of terms of trade that may change the results here. So we have a very high R squared over 80. So we have a lot of potential explanatory power on those regressions. Okay, going for the discussion of the results. Now we focus on the liberalization or the variable lib on each one of those regressions. For exports, the liberalization it's only significant on the second version of the equations. That means that the pure effect of liberalization on not encompassing the effect of the elasticities is not really significant. But when you incorporate the effect of elasticities in the exports, the effect of liberalization exports, the pure effect of liberalization becomes significant. And an unexpected finding here on exports is that liberalization has a negative sign on exports. That's unexpected and goes against the findings of Thirlwall. And we will discuss this a bit later, okay? So the effects of the results of liberalization on imports, it's only significant in the first version, but not in the second, which means that the pure effect of liberalization, not accounting for the elasticity interactions, it's significant and positive sign as expected. Trade liberalization boosts imports. But one interesting thing that we found is in the second version, the interaction between liberalization and Y, that's national income, is very significant, very potent. So, but not the pure effect of liberalization, which means that in a scenario of open economy, liberalized trade, liberalization only increases imports when national income is increasing too. Not it does not increase imports purely, but only with the effect of a growth of national income. Going for the trade balance, it's a mix of those results. It is significant on the first equation, so it has a negative sign, so this confirms the hypothesis that trade liberalization has a negative effect on trade balance of developing countries, especially in the case of Latin America. It was confirmed. But in the second version of the equation, the lib variable is not significant on its own. It's only significant the interaction between lib and y, as in the imports results, and the lib and underval. So this means that liberalization alone does not worsen trade balance, but together with other effects, the scenario of an opened economy, trade economy, those effects have a far greater impact, be this the exchange rate underval or be the national income. Now we'll head to the discussion of the results for undervaluation, the underval variable. These are a bit shorter. For exports, it is significant on the first equation, but not in the second, which means the pure effect has a positive sign. So we can say that undervaluation of the currency, the exchange rate being undervaluated boosts exports, increases exports. But in the second equation, the interaction between underval and lib for liberalization is very significant, very strong. So again, we note that in the scenario of an open, a liberalized economy, the undervaluation of the exchange rate has more effect. And in the second equation, the undervaluation alone, the pure effect is not significant, only in the liberalized scenario, only in the interaction between underval and lib. Okay? For imports, undervaluation is not significant on either occasion for imports. Although it has a negative sign as expected, it's not significant. So the results on trade balance are a mix of those two. It is not significant alone on either versions of the equations, but in the second version, in the interaction between underval and lib, it is very significant and has a high coefficient. It tells us again that the joint effect of currency undervaluation and liberalization of trade are powerful for having a positive effect on trade balance if the currency is undervaluated. And we can conclude the opposite. If the currency is overvaluated, you also have a negative impact on trade balance in the scenario of the trade being liberalized or opened. Okay. So jumping to the conclusions, the main findings is the first hypothesis of liberalization deteriorating trade balance was confirmed, although there was this unexpected finding of liberalization have a negative sign for exports. This was unexpected because what Thirlwall found and what the literature endorses, it's that liberalization of exports will increase the exports, and we find those exports decreasing after liberalization, or the effect of liberalization. This might occur because of the very small R² that we have for the regressions of exports. It's only 15, 14, and 16. And so there may be a lot of effects that are not being captured by the equation and are being captured by the variable lib that makes the variable negative for exports. And this is an opportunity for further studies and deeper studies on the theme. Well, the second hypothesis that's the undervaluation, it's relevant for trade balance, was partially confirmed, being purely relevant for exports, but not for imports. And but an interesting finding of the study was the joint effect of underval and lib that has consistency being significant along those regressions and has high coefficients in most of them. So we note that as the structuralist theory, macro developmentalism structuralist theory suggests, the level of the currency, not just its nominal changes, the level of currency based on the per capita level of the country or the production level of the country, it's significant when the economy is open, it's liberalized for trade. So if the currency is over or undervaluated, it has a real impact on trade balancing and maybe balance of payments if the economy has been opened. And that's it. Thank you all, and as Mario said, obrigado.
Thank you, Marcos. So let's try to have a video again.
Okay.
In the meanwhile, I would ask the discussant to step in, and I am the discussant. So it's not too difficult, is it? So thank you for the presentation, for the paper. I didn't know this literature, but I quite like it. So I've got just a few comments for you. You used 50 years in your empirical analysis, and I'm reading your paper now. You say, these 15 years in Latin America were marked by profound structural changes. Therefore, this time frame enables capturing the transition between different development models. I wonder whether using 50 years could actually be an issue. Exactly because of what you said, exactly because you had quite a few structural changes in that period. So do you have any, dummy variable or any instrument capturing this structural change over time? And you will see that my question has a specific reason, which I'm going to mention in a few seconds. The second question is, when you include Brazil, I think you take the 1991 as a starting year for the liberalization reforms, if I'm not wrong. Have you tried also different years? So have you tried different starting points? Because that could change, or by contrast, confirm your findings as robust. And my third point, I go straight to the main points by skipping minor things. And my third point is, overall, I think that your analysis is robust. The only puzzling result, you know that because you mentioned that, is when you run your regression for export growth, you find that the coefficient associated with the liberalization variable is negative, although not significant in the first version of your model. And obviously this doesn't make much sense. And second, your R square is quite low. I mean, I don't expect the R square to be super high, but if you look at the other models that the other regressions that you run, your R square is much higher than this. I wonder whether here there's something missing, or perhaps it could be the problem that I mentioned before, meaning the period that you are considering is perhaps too long, and perhaps you should try to run your regression using subsamples or something like that. I'm an econometrician, so I'm just wondering whether there could be a solution to fix this problem, because in my opinion, the other regressions are absolutely fine, but this one about exports would require further explanation, and perhaps you should try to check whether there is something missing in your regression, which could explain the very low R square. So this is all for me, and there's another question here.
Thanks, sir. This was a very interesting and thought-provoking presentation. Just following up on this time frame, 50 years, negative impact on the trade balance. But a negative trade balance, can it be sustained forever? Is this kind of a permanent effect? And following up on that, negative impact deteriorates. Listening to you, it seems that you have a sort of idea that this is bad. Is it necessarily so? I mean, if a country lives beyond its budget constraint, perhaps is happier, you could use more import in a stage of development to invest. So it could be perfectly consistent with the development path. So I think that this kind of results provide some interesting question that could be addressed further. And perhaps it would also be interesting to look into the composition of imports and exports, for example, in terms of structural change and recent developments, import and export of intermediates rather than final good. This could perhaps also provide some more structure to your story. Thanks anyway.
Thank you. Any other questions?
No. So please go on with the answers.
Thank you. For the first two questions, for the year of Brazil, Brazil and the other structural changes along the period. We know it's a long period. I discussed this with Oreiro, and we tried to make it happen with 50 years because it's one of the goals of the study to try to make it work, being cohesive with a long time frame, but it has its costs. As you said, there is a lot of structural change in the countries in this period. I have not tried to move the starting year for Brazil to 1990 or 1992. This may be an interesting experiment to see the findings change or not, but we know of the cost that a long period has and the structural changes, and especially in the exports that you mentioned, there is something missing. I believe that maybe in terms of trade, some variable like that captures the international trade changing along those 50 years, the boom of commodities, the rise of commodities, the rise of China. There is a lot of things changing, so we have to experiment with new variables to see if you can complete if you can get a more complete regression that has a R squared a bit higher, not 90%, but a bit higher, so we can test if this effect, this negative effect on exports, it's real or it's just something that's not being captured. This is a thing that I want to explore more in this theme or in this paper. And for the last question, the trade balance for it's negative forever and it's bad. Well, the results shown that the trade balance deteriorates, or has a negative impact on trade balance. Not that it is negative in itself, but it's worse than before the trade liberalization. So for some countries it's negative, some countries it is not negative. But it being negative, is it bad? Not by itself. You can make arguments for it being forever negative, being bad for currency crisis or external crisis for developing countries being very common, especially in Latin America, but it's not bad in itself. That's why in the paper I do not go as far as to make an assumption that liberalization makes trade balance worse than balance of payments worse and genetic crisis. I will leave this this connection for the authors to explore a bit more, but I only stated that the liberalization worsens the trade balance, but it is bad, not necessarily. That's the answer. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So other questions or other points? Okay, so we can finish this session in advance, 6 minutes in advance, so we can join the Roma's Dolce Vita and have a few well-deserved drinks. Thank you, Marcos, for joining us, and we're sorry that
I wish I could join you, but
next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Su tutti